All right, now bring to order the Town of Corte Madera regular town council meeting for Tuesday, February 7th, 2023, starting at 6:30 p.m. Can we get a call to order?
Councilmember Casissa.
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio. Here. Councilmember Thomas is absent. Vice Mayor Beckman.
Here.
And Mayor Lee.
Here. Can we salute and pledge the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll close item 1, moving to item 2, open time for public comment. Any member of the public may address the town council concerning any item not on the council's agenda. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes unless otherwise specified by the mayor or presiding officer. Is there anyone that has public comment? It looks like we have someone in the room.
There we go. Good evening. David McPherson, my family and I have lived in Corte Madera for the last 27 years on Corte Madera Avenue. And I was reflecting recently upon the unprecedented storms that we've already experienced this year, and the fact that despite all the wind and the rain, no trees came down in Town Park. And the storm drains were cleared. And the flooding was minimal at best. I thought, this is not an accident. This is because this town is firing on all cylinders. And then I started reflecting upon the housing element and the thousands, well, maybe not thousands, hundreds of hours that went into looking for the properties that could possibly meet the state mandate, and the drafting that went into making sure that that housing element would meet the state mandate, could be presented to the public, and then the town manager and planning staff meeting with the businesses and the concerned citizens that were pushing back and deftly handling that opposition, and it got done. And then I thought, that doesn't happen by chance. And then I reflected on this Paradise Drive Complete Streets project. And this is something that I've been passionate about for 14 years. And I pick up the paper, although it's on my computer screen, and I read that the town secured $2.05 million from MTC to go to that project. And I choked up. I thought that is something that really takes the town being on top of every possibility and struggling through to make that project the best and safest that it can be for the town. And then finally, I reflected upon the town's decision to pledge $3 million to the Tamalpais Drive overcrossing. And I thought, that does not happen. Cities and towns don't go to Caltrans and say, we will pledge this money to make this thing right. They stare down Caltrans and play a game of chicken until Caltrans either ponies up the money or the town doesn't, or city doesn't get exactly what they want. And that's not by chance. That took citizens that voted for tax measures that allows the town to build its finances. It took incredible hard work by town managers to balance the budget and get things squared away. And it took the town council really saying, this is a 50 to 75-year project, and we've got to do it right. So I came tonight just to say my family is grateful, and we understand the hard work and hours that go into doing that and getting it right. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any comment or anyone on Zoom?
Yes, we have a hand up from Roy Wolford. Roy, you should be able to speak.
Good evening. This is a very short message and a request. I sent an email to the 5 council members and 3 staff members this afternoon. I ask and I hope you'll take the time to listen to the attached John Batchelor podcast. In the podcast, John and his guest Michael Vlahos, have a conversation relating that the Roman Empire fell in stages over centuries and how similar many elements of that decline is to America today. The podcast is about 17 minutes in duration. Please take the time to listen to the podcast. It is worthwhile, and share it with others. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Patty Stolier.
Good evening. I just wanted to give a quick update for Age-Friendly Corte Madera. We do that quarterly. So we are still working on updating the survey that will go out to all the elders in Corte Madera, and still working on the map of walking and biking paths showing the water fountains and benches and restrooms. Our next Lions Share is planned for April, which is when Lions volunteers help older Corte Maderans with their little projects at home. Stay tuned for the exact date in April. If you have questions, call 415-480-9758. We're currently deciding whether to bring our nonagenarians together in person this year after 3 years of doorstep celebrations. It's a decision about whether to risk planning an indoor event and being subject to the variants of COVID, or do we do it at their doorsteps again? So we have to think about that. And I'm happy to note that other towns in Marin are following our lead and are also hosting events honoring their elders in San Rafael and Fairfax, and I think maybe 1 or 2 others. We are continuing our monthly age-friendly Marin forums on Zoom. January was on decluttering your life. February 22nd is deciding when to get back into in-person settings and feel safe after years of isolation. And March 22nd is not too old for that, on sensuality and sexuality through the years. We've also been trying to advocate for a mixed housing and activity center, maybe at the old cinema. Since the Twin Cities have no actual senior center or social gathering spot, we've long seen the need for something like that. And you might remember the age-friendly intergenerational center that was so successful before the shutdown. The Senior Arts Colony template that Tim Carpenter has created and replicated many times is so perfect. They have a theater with stage for live performances, activity rooms for painting, ceramics, music, fitness, aquatic centers, with senior housing on the floors upstairs. I visited there while in Southern California and was very impressed. Check out NoHoSeniorArtsColony.com for an example, the North Hollywood one, NoHoSeniorArtsColony.com. I hope we can bring something like that to our community. Thank you.
Next up, we will have Jim Jordan. James Jordan, sorry.
Good evening. Do you hear me? James Jordan from Mohawk Avenue, Corte Madera. I haven't spoken at a town council meeting for 3 or 4 months. I want to make first belated thank you to Bob Ravizio. He was a great council member, always professional, informed, prepared, wise man, moderate in judgment. But we're fortunate to have elected his wife, Pat Ravizio, to the town council. Congratulations to Rosa Thomas and to Eli Beckman, our vice mayor, on re-election. And my personal thanks to Rebecca Vaughn, who's the best assistant town manager and town clerk in the state of California. I submitted 2 statements to the Parks and Rec Commission on January 23rd, and I've sent those for your consideration. And I think we've reached a point where consideration of installing an artificial turf soccer field in the town park should be terminated. Professional soccer players, football players prefer natural grass fields. Most of the information available shows their artificial turf fields produce more injuries to players. There's the health hazards of artificial turf, much more than grass fields, including PFAS, forever chemicals, injuries to sports players, especially young people. And the pollution aspect of the artificial turf, the micro and macro plastic pollution of the waterways, the plastic waste after they have to be replaced every 8 or 10 years, and the plastic cannot be recycled. An important event occurred in 2021 in the spring when the California Department of Toxic Substances Control under the California EPA began to study artificial turf. And that process is occurring now, and it's going to take another year or two and maybe longer. If they find that there are hazards, then that's going to begin another process to create regulations to be implemented. So I think that is at least for a year or two or more, or permanently, a bar to further consideration of installing artificial turf in the park. Now, the town has taken the lead with the Climate Action Committee and Phoebe Golden as the Climate Action and Adaptation Coordinator. We should also take the lead in protecting the residents, especially the children, by planning for the installation of only improved national grass sports fields. Thank you for your consideration and good luck in the year ahead.
Next up, we have Carl Spurzum.
All right, can you hear me, folks?
Yes, we can hear you.
Lorena, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Carl. Go ahead.
No, my comment is just to give a big required for flooding that occurred all over.
Carl, you're getting kind of cut off. If you could move maybe somewhere where you have better reception.
Yeah, I'm on. Yeah, hang on. I'm on the wrong router. Never mind. Hopefully this is better.
Yes, that's better. I'll start the timer over.
Okay, that's okay. It won't take long. No, I just had a nice chat with RJ this week. I think the town came through these storms in great fashion. I've lived in Madera Gardens on Lakeside, Mohawk originally, for over 30 years. And I was dragged into flood control issues back then by Clyde, and happily was along his side as he got a lot of things done, especially the big pumps at the end of the High Canal. So it's really just a big shout out to the man, Clyde Marquardt. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, and that was our last public comment.
Okay, no other public comment on Zoom or written, and seeing none in the room, I'll close item number 2. Seeing item number 3, there are no presentations today. We'll move to item number 4, which is the consent calendar. The purpose of the consent calendar is to group items together which are routine or have been discussed previously and do not require further discussion. They will be approved by a single motion. Any member of the town council, town staff, or the public may request removal of an item for discussion, which rescheduling of the item will be at the discretion of the mayor and the town council. Is there any items that would like to be pulled by any of those? Okay, seeing that, can I get a motion for approval?
Oh, and we do not, for the record, we don't have any public comment related to the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So with that,
Okay, to approve consent items 4A through 4G.
And I would like to second that. And I would like to say, if I'm allowed to make a comment, congratulations on bringing the road project in under budget. Under budget, RJ, one more for RJ.
okay, call
Okay.
for vote.
Councilmember Casissa?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Councilmember Thomas is absent. Vice Mayor Beckman
Yes.
and Mayor Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
All right. So with that, that will close the consent calendar, moving to item number 5, which is public hearings. Public hearing 5A is the first reading and possible introduction of an ordinance amending chapter 2.16 of the Planning Commission of Title II of the Corte Madera Municipal Code. And we're going to have a discussion about the Community Development Director. Adam?
Thank you, Mayor Lee, and council members. This is, as you mentioned, would be a possible introduction of an ordinance that amends chapter 2.16 of the town's municipal code related to the planning commission. That's where the formation of the planning commission exists in our municipal code. And really, this ordinance is about ensuring and relates to the next item on our agenda, item 6A, about the creation of a community development department and director position. And this ordinance would essentially cause all references to the planning director in our municipal code, and which occurs in many instances throughout the municipal code, particularly in the Title 18 and of the zoning ordinance. But it would ensure that references to the planning director shall mean community development director. And so essentially, upon creation of the community development director, our municipal code would then sort of allow for the correct reference of its actions and duties to equate to those of the community development director. So there is also a cleanup in the section 2.16 just to remove some obsolete provisions. This hasn't been updated since, I think it was, what was it, 1962. So always good to take another fresh look at our municipal code sections and bring them up to 2023. So with that, the specific ordinance before you for introduction is an attachment 1 of this staff report for this item, and happy to answer any questions you may have. And this is a 2 meeting. It would be introduced at this meeting, and then a second reading would be before you at the February 21st meeting.
Any questions?
I'm just wondering if you could explain just a little more for the community. What's the big why here? Why is it that we want to do this?
Yeah, we were considering opening this up as the same, maybe public hearing for both items. Certainly we'll get to that in item 6A, but essentially the reason behind this primarily is to something actually I've been thinking about for a long time, being the former planning and building director. Many of my colleagues throughout the county and really throughout the state of California, really the position is better reflected in a title of community development director, and that encompasses a little bit more than just planning and building functions. Oftentimes that also includes housing related responsibilities, code enforcement to a certain extent, and other economic development. You know, I'm not proposing anything to change structurally those the way that our organizational structure works at this point in time, but I do see this as a sort of thinking longer term, a better title for this job, which is more in line with again other positions throughout county and state. A lot of cities are moving away from planning and building director into a community development director position title. So in that regard, I also think it certainly will help with recruiting as well when we get to it. So no changes to the actual pay scale from the planning and building director, which we could talk about in the next item. So that's hopefully answers the big why. Yeah.
Yeah, this is maybe off the wall. But if we approve this tonight, then it would get potentially passed at our next meeting, so it goes into effect, right? If you don't hire a community development person, if it takes you 3 months to hire somebody, is there a gap there? Because this all refers to a community development person that hasn't been hired. And again, it's just.
Yeah,
okay.
No gap.
Okay, seeing no more questions with the council, we can open it up for public comment.
We don't have any raised hands on Zoom and no emailed public comment and no one at the podium.
Oh, would you like to speak? Nothing. Okay, so with that, I'll close public comment and do we need a motion to move this
Correct.
forward? Okay,
Can I just make one quick comment?
yes, of
Just
course.
want to say thumbs up to adding little cleanup language in there. I feel like a best practice whenever we touch the Muni code is to just read through whatever section we're working on. And if there's any cleanup that can be done to just further streamline stuff, throw it in the ordinance as well. I figure anytime we touch the Muni code, better to leave it, better than we found it. So thank you very much for doing that. And I'm happy to move introduction and waive the first reading of this ordinance, which I don't believe has a number yet, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We assigned the number at the second reading.
Great.
And I'll second. I'll
Okay,
second.
we can get a
Okay.
vote.
Councilmember Casissa.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes, yes.
Councilmember Thomas is absent. Vice Mayor Beckman
Yes.
and Mayor Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
All right, so closing item number 5, we'll move to item number 6, which is the business items. Business 6A is to consider proposal to rename the Planning and Building Department to Community Development Department, hire a Community Development Director position for the Community Development Department, and provide direction to staff regarding the creation of a new position classification. Is there a staff presentation on this?
Yes, there is. I'll sort of go over sort of the parts that I didn't cover already as to the big why, but essentially the action before you tonight is really related to creating the new position classification titled Community Development Director and the proposed salary range, which, as I mentioned, would be no different than the current salary range for the Planning and Building Director. So we are, by practice, this is a 2-meeting item as well, where we're basically relabeling and renaming, or I shouldn't say renaming, I should say adding Community Development Director position to that classification schedule that you have often seen, and adding that salary range as well in that document. As part of that, obviously, I will be looking to recruit a community development director. And that will be a process that once we have the job position and job description accepted, and that's part of the item before you this evening as well, that I would go out and use with Janet and recruit for a new hire at that position, department head level position. As part of that, obviously, we're going to sort of rebrand the department itself to the Community Development Department. And also, well, I mentioned, and obviously recruit and hire for the actual position, which we have not started yet at this point in time. I do have one, we did receive a comment earlier, just sort of the last hour or earlier today, that I did want to note, sort of an astute reader of our staff report did look through the job description and had a comment regarding one of the special requirements on page 10 of the staff report. One of the bullets was referred to as acute, talked about actually one of the special requirements for this position was that acute hearing is required when providing phone or personal service. And I think the commenter was concerned that that might exclude those who are hearing impaired from the qualifications for this position. So I'm happy to sort of make a change or recommend a change to the council, that we would change that bullet point to ability to communicate via phone, email, and in-person dialogue, which obviously involves hearing, but could be done with aid of some sort as well. So that would be one recommended change to the job description. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this proposed renaming and rebranding of the department.
No questions? Questions?
Yeah, I have a couple for you. I think on the salary, when you did the comparisons or when it went out to get comps, Seraphil and Nevada were in there. I was just wondering how you got those, why you used those as comparables? Because again, those towns are much larger than Corte Madera. And it seems like their planner community development departments would be a lot more complex than they are here.
Yeah, I think certainly for Centerfell, I think one way to do it is you sort of combine both to see where you fit amongst the smaller to larger organizations. And so certainly Corte Madera being lower than Centerfell shows that is there is a higher pay scale there for that larger community. And typically we'll sort of use a variety of different agencies for that comparison. So it's not, I think all Marin County jurisdictions, it's worthwhile including them in a salary survey, just so that you can see where amongst those jurisdictions that is. It's not meant to be sort of this is apples to apples necessarily comparison.
Okay. And I think also it's mentioned that you're looking for somebody who has 5 years experience and 2 years managerial experience. Is that typical for this position?
Yeah, it is certainly. I think this is a position. I'll just use myself as an example. I had about 15 years, say 10 in government, and then at least a good 7 supervisorial experience, sorry, and management experience. So before coming here, so it is typical. I mean, this is a senior management department head position. The expectation that certainly is that they would be skilled at management, have that experience, and also working for a governmental agency as well.
Okay. And then along the lines, how many people would be reporting to that position, or what's kind of like the structure you have in mind?
Well, I'll just tell you what the current structure, how many direct reports there are. So it's planning and building. So we have 3 in the planning team, and we have actually there's one individual who's one position that's shared between planning and building. So that would be 4. And then another 4, 1 currently vacant, actually would be 5 in the building department. So we're talking about 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I know about the salary part of it. Besides like the usual benefits like medical, pension, stuff like that, are there any other benefits that may come into play?
It's all covered by the MOU with the department heads.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's equal to all the other department head benefits.
Okay, and the last one is, what's the interview process going to be? Because I know when we did hire Ashley from Park and Rec, is actually myself, because I was chair of Park and Rec, vice chair Emily Janowski, and then we brought in, I think, Dave from who was a town manager for San Anselmo. And we actually, there was the 3 of us that did the interview process. I'm just wondering what that process, or if you've thought about it at all.
Yeah, haven't really laid
Okay.
that out yet. So when the time comes, I'm happy to share what we're going to be doing in that regard.
All right, thanks.
Okay, seeing no more questions. I don't have any questions. I do have a comment that I'll save, but yeah. So then I'll open it up for public comment. So is there anyone that would like to speak on this item in our presence? No, seeing none.
We do not have any emailed public comment or any hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, so with that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the dais for discussion. Anything? Okay, anyone? I would like to add that I am very impressed about the astute reader and resident that basically saw language that might have basically, excluded someone that would be wonderful for the community, and that we always have the ability to, create accessible features that would help them thrive in our environment. And so I really appreciate that feedback and incorporation into the right. So with that, I'm looking for a motion.
Just for this item, sorry, there was an error that I didn't see on the agenda that says adopt resolution, but since these are 2 meeting items, we normally adopt in the second meeting. So this would just be direction to staff to proceed and bring this back for approval at the next meeting.
So, but we would still take,
as
a-
amended, I guess.
so we would still take a vote to move it
We-
forward, or is it just that we need to
No,
define
we
consensus?
don't need a vote
Okay, no,
No, we should take a vote on whether you want
Yeah,
to.
move
approve
forward
it
as
for
is.
as
second-
amended.
As a second reading.
That's my,
Okay.
Yeah.
as amended. Okay, so
As
can we,
amended.
do we need a motion to do that?
Yeah,
So moved,
Second.
or Eli can.
He seconded you.
okay, Councilmember Casissa.
Yes.
Councilmember Avazio.
Yes,
Councilmember Thomas is absent. Vice Mayor Lee, Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Sorry about that, and Mayor Lee.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
and that motion passes.
and this is as amended as.
Yeah, with those comments.
All right. Just want to say thank you to this is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. So I appreciate the support there.
And I think it sets a good trajectory as far as our policies towards those processes and the community, that we're here to develop better ones, not just control it. Okay, so moving on to business item 6B. This is the presentation acceptance of the Town of Corte Madera Annual Independent Audit Report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. Daria?
Thank you. Good evening, Town Council. Andrew Roth, the partner with the Poon Group, who is the town's accountancy firm, is here to present the audit which you have been provided with.
Good evening, Mayor and Town Council. I have a presentation. Am I able to share my screen? Okay, so I'm gonna go through my presentation here. So we're here tonight to go over the presentation of the town's annual financial report, and then there's also one other report that we did, and just kind of give you an idea of our audit process, some of our key findings, and then also some key financial information. So what we've gone through the scope of work, the items that we're engaged to complete, our audit responsibilities, our approach as a Poon Group to the audit, some key accounting changes, which you will see. I do have comparatives in the financials, but it's with the new GASB's, the standards that are put in, it kind of makes it a little bit harder to see the comparatives. So I'll discuss that further. Overview of the financial statements, financial indicators, and key pension information, and then the audit results. So scope of work. So we were engaged, at least for this part of the audit. So we were engaged to audit the annual financial report of the town of Corte Madera, and as well as we did an alternative compliance examination. That was an option for the state and local fiscal recovery funds that were received by the state during the year. And then we also assisted in the preparation of the financial statements. We want to go over some audit responsibilities. So management's responsibilities, management's responsible for the financial statements, responsible for to present the financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America, also known as US GAAP, adopt sound accounting policies, establish and maintain our internal controls over financial reporting and compliance, provide evidence supporting the amounts and disclosures in financial statements, the fair presentation of financial statements that are free from material weakness, whether due to fraud or error, and also to prevent and detect fraud. Us, our firm, and us as the auditors, we are responsible to perform the audit in conformity with the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and the standards applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. We're responsible for communicating with those charged with governance. This is part of that communication. We are responsible for assessing the audit risk of internal controls over financial reporting. We are responsible for determining the fair presentation of the financial statements, and upon that, rendering an opinion on the financial statements, and if we have noted any recommendations to management to provide those. So our approach to the audit. The Poon Group's approach for the audit of the town of Corte Madera. So phase one, that's going to be your detailed planning. I think we might have gone over some of the stuff in the sanitary district, but we'll go over it again. So our detailed planning is first year audit. So we came out and kind of got an understanding of the city, how it runs, the different revenue streams, kind of the different transaction classes. And from there, then we move over and kind of get an idea of the internal controls. So we come out and we do thorough interviews with the team, the city's team, the finance team who's helped along the process. And I want to thank them for that. So we kind of document all the flow charts and internal controls, and then we'll do some walkthroughs or some testing controls to on the main transaction classes, which is your financial reporting, which includes like bank reconciliations, your revenues. So that's like your billings, your revenue recognition and cash receipts, and expenses. That's gonna be like your procurement process and cash disbursements. We also look at the payroll and related liabilities, and then also some general IT controls. Phase 3, this is typically we call like year end. It's kind of when we come out and this is after the year is closed, and then we come out and we validate the account balances in the financial statements. And from there, we work to prepare the financial statements and issue our audit opinions. Moving forward. So accounting changes. The big change this year is going to be GASB 87 leases. This did have a significant effect on the town's financial statements. So you will note GASB 87 applied to lessors and lessees. Lessors is if you're renting to someone, lessees if you're renting from someone. But the only one actually like that had material leases was gonna be lessor. So in essence, previously, you were just getting rental income, but now you have to record it as a receivable and then a deferred inflow. And typically, long-term items aren't shown on the governmental fund statement, so you're going to see a really large number on the general fund on the receivables, and then you're going to see a deferred inflow. So just make a note when you see that they kind of offset each other. They amortize in different methods, but you will be so that's where the comparability is going to be a little different for at least the balance sheet. So in essence, that just brings everything onto the books. So we discussed in note 1 of the financial statements, if you want to go further into the other GASB pronouncements, that they were not material and did not have an effect on the city, on the town. Some overview of the financial statements. I'm really going to go over the current year results because we did not audit prior year, and also the comparability. But if you have any questions, I think the MD&A has a lot of the information about the changes and kind of walk you through a bit of that. So that's a really good place in the financial statements to look. So for the government activities for the current year, the city ended with assets of $122 million. With deferred outflows of approximately $20 million, liabilities of approximately $44 million, and deferred inflows of resources at $25 million. So the big changes you're going to see there is you're going to see the assets change, and then you're going to see the liabilities decrease because the pension went down, because the big payment that was made in the previous year that ends up going into the pension. Then with the pension goes even further down because there's the CalPERS earned more than they expected to on their investments, but that goes straight into deferred inflows. So you're going to see there's a lot of different explanations, and they don't have anything really to do with the health of the city, the changes in the financials. So the deferred inflows, $25 million, net investment in capital assets that ended about $53 million, up $11 million in a year. The restricted net position is currently at $5.6 million, and then unrestricted at 14.4. So the ending net position for governmental activities of the city was $73.1 million. This is going to be a change of net position for the governmental activities. So the current year charges for services are about $3.6 million. So you'll see here the changes is it's a bit less than you'll see. There is a big change on the expense, but that is really the big payment that was made to pension the previous year comes back and it affects the expense the way that the conversion entries go when you're actually doing that pension entry. So that it did have an effect and decrease the expenses for the government activities for the current year. So operating grants contributions 2.9 million, capital grants contributions about 1.3. Total program revenues, so that's going to be $7.9 million. Your expenses decrease, and this is really at the government-wide level. So this is after your conversion entries, is after you're putting in all the changes to pension, all the changes to OPEB. We're going to go over the general fund in a little bit. And that's where you actually like see that's the current method, the current resource method of accounting. And that's more of like what you'll typically be working with. So general revenue, so that's gonna be your tax revenue, your investment income was $23 million. And then so your total change in net position for the current year was $23.7 million for your government activities. Net position for your business type activities. So the assets, most of the changes, GASB 7 did not have an effect on the business type activities. So you're not gonna actually see the government activities is where you're gonna see most of the difference in the general fund on the balance sheet. So your business type activities increased about $2.1 million in the assets to $35.8 million. Liabilities decreased about $94,000 to $572,000. Net investment capital assets. This is your capital assets net of debt, which you do not have any for those assets. So that's the net $26 million. And then the unrestricted net position is at 9.1. So the total net position for your business type activities was 35.2 for the year ending June 30th. The change in that position, business type activities, stay pretty steady. The charge of services decreased about $451,000 to $2.8 million. Your expenses decreased a little bit. You will see there were some reclassifications of some items that were previously non-operating, but we consider them operating. So that change. It doesn't have a big effect, but you will see some differences when you look at the comparatives on the operating and non-operating. So your net cost services changed very little, about $223,000. Then your general revenues had about $4.1 million. That's mainly your tax revenue that goes towards the sewer or the sanitation district. So your change in net position for the sanitation district was $2.2 million. Pretty steady the prior year. So the general fund, you'll see that the large changes in the general fund, and these are specifically related to the implementation of GASB 87, as well as the city receiving some funds that remain unearned at year end for grants. So you ended with the assets about 52.1 million, liabilities 7.1. Deferred inflows, which you did not have any in the prior year, was at 11.7. That is 100% GASB 87 implementation right there. So they're non-spendable. These are items that can't be spent, say prepaids, inventories, advances, 128,000. You're restricted. These are things that must be restricted by law or convention. That's 11.2 million. The committed balance has decreased to about 6.6 commitments made by the town council. Assignments increased a little bit to 1.3, and the overall unassigned increased to 13.9 million in the current year. So the total fund balance ended in the general fund is $33.2 million in the current year. So it's gonna be a general fund change in fund balance. So your revenues did increased a little bit to $30.3 million. Your expenditures decreased by about 14 million, and the main reason for this is just because the one-time pension payment in the prior year that you won't see. So once you get next year, you'll see a lot more comparable financials. So current year revenues over expenditures was 1.7 million. Other financing sources and uses, these are your transfers, your gain on sales of capital assets, is 308,000. So your change in fund balance for the general fund was about $2 million for the current year. We like to go over some financial indicators and key pension information. As once again, these are, you might see there's some outliers because how the pension contribution as well as the implementation of 87 affected these. So I'll just go over the current year. And actually the current year I think was the outlier because of how the pension one-time payment affected the current year expenditures. So you would see on the right side, 75% about your net cost of services. So this really what it is going to take all your expenses And then it's going to take all your program services that are allocable to those expenses, things that you could change, fees and stuff like that, versus taxes, which is a little bit harder to change. So let's say the ratio here is pretty good. And I think you will next year, it will be a bit more of a usable figure because the change that the pension affected this year. So on the conversions and the expenses at the government-wide level for government activities. So it was about 1.1% this year. So typically it's about 75-80%. It's pretty good. So your unassigned fund balance, there's really kind of like your health, your rainy day fund. It increased to about 50% this year. That's good. So typically I think you want to have about 25%, as what GFOA would say is a good ratio to have, and you're above that. So that's good. So back to the pension. You guys have pension assets this year. That is for two reasons. One, you guys paid the pension, you you paid the pension down, but then the pension earned a lot of income over the expected income. Next year, you'll see that go back because the next year, I think there's a loss based on what I looked at. So I think it'll probably go back to closer to zero. But this will give you an idea of what the change would be if you had a 1% increase or a 1% decrease in the discount rate. And just a heads up, also next year, the discount rate will be going to 7%. So you will be moving towards the pension going up about 25% of the way to this 6.15 number, or 15%. So here, and your net OPEB liability, and we'll look at the sensitivity, and this is in the notes, and it kind of gives an explanation if you want to read it in the notes. It just gives you an idea of, it gives you two different things. One's going to be the change in the discount rate, that's the long-term investment rate of return. The number two is going to be the increase or decrease in the healthcare trend rates. And so you'll see that if the healthcare trend rates increase, costs increase, but if your discount rate increases, costs decrease. So there is an inverse relation there. And it's about 2.8 million for your OPEB. And it'd go up to about 3.5 if you had to go down in percentage on that long-term rate. Audit results. So after conducting our audit results is a unmodified opinion for all opinion units. This is a clean opinion. That's kind of what you're looking for. So it pretty much states the financial statements are fairly presented on material specs. They're in conformity with GAAP. They are significant accounting policies have been consistently applied. Estimates are reasonable. Disclosures are properly reflected in the financial statements. And then also on our other report we did, which was our alternative examination for the state and local fiscal recovery fund, we determined that in all material specs, the city was in compliance with those requirements. And that's my presentation. Thank you for.
Thank you. So Daria, is it open now to the council for questions? Is there any questions from council?
Just a couple of questions for you. On one of those slides, it looked like the change in the general fund went up like 24 million on the assets. I was just trying to figure out how it went up 24 million. Unless I misread that.
Well, because the general fund is sitting on cash that's unearned, right? So they got money they haven't spent yet. I think that's like, I want to say about 6 million, but I'd had to have Dario probably speak on that. But then also the general fund also did have $20 million, I think, approximately, of lease receivables added to their books.
Yes, part of the increase in assets had to do with the fact that in the previous year, the previous auditor had recommended that the pension trust be put into an agency fund. And here Andrew and his team corrected that and corrected our beginning balance. So that was, I think, nearly $4 million, 3.4 maybe $1 million at that time. So that was part of the increase. And then also increased property tax and sales tax. And also when Andrew's talking about the general fund and in the financial statements, it's not the same as when we talk about the general fund as the operating fund. It includes a Corte Madera sales tax fund. It includes the street impact fee fund, the equipment and technology fund, that capital fund that we funded for the first time, the recreation fund, the Park Madera Center Fund. Also, the insurance fund was moved into the general fund. Previously, that had been a proprietary fund and it's been reclassified. The housing assistance fund, which doesn't really have anything in it, just a few $100s, but the recreation capital fund, and then of course the operating fund. So and also the town is holding $7 million, well, not anymore, but at the time of these financial statements was holding the $7 million that were proceeds of the certificates of participation, and that's in the general fund as well.
Okay, all right, thanks. And then the other thing also is that if I heard you correctly, we're at about 25% reserves, which would include, I guess, 2.5 million on the general fund and 2.5 million from the sales tax fund. I thought I heard that about 25% or so.
That's the that like best practices would be about 20-25%, about
Okay.
3 months.
Okay, and one last question. I'm assuming you can answer me. You didn't find any material weaknesses in controls or anything like that, correct?
We will be issuing a management letter separately, and the only thing we didn't know was just because there will be like I think material weakness purely just because we had to do the prior period adjustment, because some of those items we had to go back, and we'll be issuing that separately.
Okay, but that management letter again just covers those prior year adjustments. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's only not in like
weaknesses.
actual like controls you're doing right now. Is really just, I think it was mainly the auditor wanted to have stuff done last year, and it was not the correct way. So the team's doing a great job.
All right, thanks.
Eli, any questions? So this is where my art degree probably doesn't do me a service. So in my understanding about the new state changes and basically the way it's reporting, it related to leased properties that we own. And we basically are now showing the entirety of the lease, like the full capability of what that lease is, even if we're not collecting this year. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, and I think the largest lease is what they call we call it the gravel lot.
Yeah, so that's
development fee that it's for like.
But it's also Park Madera.
And it's Park Madera.
So it's
Center.
both of them.
It's both
and
of
it's the
those.
aggregate of whatever that lease is, because it's like a 99-year lease with the lot. So that's why it went way out there and was really big. So thank you for clarifying that. Then I'm going to go to why would the state basically mandate that, and what does it mean for us on the books? Because part of it is if we have that much money in the bank, or does that, and it said in a restricted kind of line item, is that like, could it be borrowed against? Like what's the impetus for wanting to do it like that moving forward, and understanding fiscal health in the town?
It's offset by a liability. The fruit inflows are liabilities pretty much. So it's almost one for one on it's almost like you are like a little bit above water if you would say like receivables over deferred inflow, but barely. It's not, because they amortize kind of together to go down. And since the interest rates are pretty low on what was being used, and it's not the state requiring it, it's actually GASB, it's the Government Accounting Standards Board. But it is offset. It's not going to show you in the down in your fund balance. You're not going to see it. You're going to see it barely at all.
Right. But
it's offset.
Yeah, but it is now.
It was like a big receivable.
So it showed up in a previous line item somewhere else then?
Nope, it was never on the books.
It was never. So it is that it's basically a new understanding of the value of the town and all of its pluses and minuses, right? And it shows that we have long-term fixed income coming in, right? Is kind of like why they want to show that is, and kind of assessing that is that the goal? I'm just curious what the goal was.
I think so. And I think you're the only town, actually, to be honest with you, that had like a 99-year lease like that, because the way it's worded, it was really hard to like leave it off. It was, we went through, we even like, we did a lot of like research on it.
We always want to comply. It's fine. And ultimately, it
That's what
sounds
made
like
it so
it's an
large.
advantage for the town.
What's up?
Yeah, that answers my questions. I appreciate it. So is there any other further questions from the council? Okay, with that, I will close the dice and open it up to public comment. Seeing none, is there any written or on?
We do not have any hands raised or emailed public comment.
Okay, with that, I'll close public comment. Moving back for comments. Any final thoughts?
Good job, Daria. Running the town, everybody's doing a really good job. I just, the only number that stood out for me was that are there really $13.9 million of unassigned funds? That could be a good conversation about how to spend all that money.
That included all the funds, you know, like the sales tax funds, the gas tax, all of the funds.
I'm kind of kidding.
As well as our reserves, right?
Kind of.
Yeah, reserves and then. Fred?
No, just really quick, I want to thank you also, because I think we just get these reports with a whole bunch of numbers in them. It's all packaged for us. But I know you and your team, there's a lot of work that goes on behind these audits that I think people don't realize a lot of times, because you have to provide them with a lot of information. And I know that there's a lot of conversations and questions that go back and forth. I just don't think people recognize that, but appreciate all your hard work and your team also.
Yeah.
Yep. Second that.
All right, so with that, we need to accept.
I'll go ahead and make a motion. Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept the annual independent audit report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Call for a vote.
Council member Casissa.
Yes.
Council member Ravazio.
Yes.
Council member Thomas is absent. Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Lee.
Yes,
Thank you. The motion passes.
okay, and that closes item
Thank you guys
6B.
very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Moving on to business item 6C. This is the discussion and consideration and approval of a description of the role of council liaison and action by mayor to appoint council members to serve as liaisons to town advisory bodies. Adam? Or Rebecca?
Yeah, I will just say, that, you know, this is part of the agenda that we had scheduled for our our workshop on the 2023 work plan. So obviously we didn't get to that part of the agenda on the 27th. So we're bringing it to you this evening, and I'll talk about the other parts of the agenda as well as during the town manager report.
Thank you, Mayor Lee and council members. And yes, part of the recommended action is to consider appointments of liaisons to the various town boards, commissions, and committees. But if we get to that point and for any reason anybody wants to wait on that and review the work of the various boards and commissions and committees before figuring out which assignments they want to take on, we can wait on that. But the important part is just reviewing the role proposed for the liaison position and see if there are any changes or amendments or edits you wanted to make to that. We did pare it down to a one-page description, and this really came out of just not understanding the history of these appointments that we were making annually. We have 6 boards, commissions, and committees: the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, now the Climate Action Committee, the Flood Board, the Parks and Recreation Commission, the Planning Commission, and the Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. And not all of them had identified council liaisons appointed annually when the council reorganizes and the mayor makes appointments. So in addition to not having appointees to each of these committees, it was also never quite set in stone what the role of those appointees were, what was expected of them as a council liaison to the committee they were assigned to. Some were more involved than others. Also, some committees don't meet regularly, so some council members may have been more burdened than others with having to stay on top of all of the meetings and actions and ongoings of that committee. So initially, when I had written this, I had stated that the goal was to attend the meetings, but now that the meetings are held remotely via Zoom and in person, it's up to the prerogative of the assigned council member, whether they wanted to attend in person, whether they wanted to attend via Zoom, whether they wanted to engage with the chair and vice chair and view the meetings remotely. But at its heart, this position is meant to function as facilitating communications between the legislative body and the council. It's not intended for the liaison to be an advocate for the body or give direction or influence the decision of the legislative body. It's meant to just be a presence and when called upon, share what the council is working on, make sure that the council member assigned as the liaison monitors the committee to make sure they're working within their scope, answer any questions about whether or not they are working within their scope, if there's any changes, asking for clarification, council priorities, etc. I think that covers the gist of it. Once this is reviewed and approved, it's my intention to have this live in the staff report for the annual appointment of committee appointments. So when you get that annual staff report in December that lists all the various joint powers, authorities, and other boards and committees that council members are assigned to, this role would also be listed in there as sort of a reminder of what you're committing yourselves to. The one thing that Adam pointed out that we were remiss in including in this staff report was essentially a description of each of the town's boards, commissions, and committees. And while I didn't have one prepared, essentially, I do have something I can share, do a screen share if you're interested. It's the annual recruitment notice that we publish for the community, which basically summarizes the work of each committee and also lays out when those boards and committees' regular meetings are held. So, for example, BPAC and Flood Board meet bi-monthly. One meets on the second Monday of odd months, one meets on the second Monday of even months. So those only meet potentially 6 times a year each. The Climate Action Committee meets monthly. Planning Commission can meet up to 2 times per month. Parks and Rec Commission meets once a month, and Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee meets as needed. So since we do have 5 council members and 6 appointments, it may be worth noting that there are committees that don't meet as frequently that someone could potentially commit themselves to representing both committees if they wish. And if any of the current council members wish to share any experiences they've had in the past serving as a liaison to the committee where questions came up, where you would have liked more definition, might be helpful to share those experiences as well. Answer any questions?
So we'll bring it to the dais. If council has any questions for Rebecca about the proposed.
Well, on the liaisons change in itself. Only I'd like to hear from Rebecca as to what motivated this, just so we better understand why the change. Again, kind of the big why. I'm always wanting to know the why.
Because it always came up every year when we do the appointments. Why are there liaison appointments requested for, I believe it was Flood Board and was it Parks and Rec and no others. And I couldn't find any reason in the archives why we were requesting council appointees to serve as a liaison to those roles, but not planning or BPAC or sales tax.
And
The people that were assigned, the council members that were assigned to these roles were unclear what their purpose as an appointee was to do.
Yeah, and
how involved.
I'd like to speak to that just for a little bit as well, just because I think that was part of the impetus that I was most interested in as well, was just making sure that when we do, or the council does assign liaisons to the various different committees and commissions, that there's a common understanding of what that really entails in terms of what that role is in relation to those committees and commissions. And certainly the idea behind laying that out was to make sure that there is a division. These are appointed advisory bodies that are essentially functioning as independent bodies, and weighing in on those things that the council has directed them to opine on and then advise the council on. And so I think in the job description, which is a, in quotes, job description, you have jobs already that are pretty all encompassing, but thought that was a good way to sort of describe those responsibilities or roles, if you will. It tries to make it laid out pretty clearly that these bodies act in accordance with the functions and I think the bylaws, and then advise the council. And so hopefully that was just trying to make that clear for all involved when those assignments are made. And I think with respect to the planning commission, there is some uniqueness there that I think Amy, if you want to speak to that.
Sure. I think we took the planning commission off the list of the bodies for whom we would have a liaison, because the planning commission actually is required under state law and has its own autonomy and makes binding decisions. And most importantly, those decisions can be appealed to the city council, where you want to look at that with an independent eye de novo. So I think we're looking for liaisons for the others, but not for that are purely advisory, but not for the others. You know, if council wants to continue, I mean, you don't have to have liaisons. It's just it has been the history to have some, and we just wanted to clarify, like, do we want them? If so, what are they doing? What are their roles as opposed to the committee roles?
Are we just doing questions?
Just questions, and then we'll bring it back for discussion. And if we're okay with the way that it is, then there's also a request to determine which those are and what the interests are within the group.
Okay.
Assignments.
So I have questions for Rebecca, but then under comments, I have experience because I've been doing it for Park and Rec, Sales Tax Override Committee, and also the Finance Committee. I've liaison with those, so I can get into that under comments.
I think that there was a question, so ultimately you can answer and speak to that now. I think that that's okay, like, because that was part of the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, so I've done it for all three. This job description kind of fits that. I do have a couple of questions on here, which I'll ask you about in a minute, which I think may not fit in here. But yeah, Sales Tax Override and the Finance Committee, I want to say those are a little bit more subdued a little bit, because the sales tax override, they only meet, I think, twice a year, and that's it. And Finance Committee doesn't meet that often either. And some of those is just providing input from the county council's perspective on what we're doing with our budget. So it just helps them sometimes, like on the Finance Committee, with financial decisions. On Park and Rec, Todd had started that with me because Ashley had came on board. So it was partially helping her because she was brand new to the town. And she didn't know processes or anything like that. Yeah, and then from chairing Park and Rec, and I kind of worked into actually sit on the executive committee to invite me to those meetings. But it's just providing input from the town council standpoint, again, around budget or maybe what direction we may be taking, or sometimes our processes. Right. The other thing I think that's helped also is that if there's a new chair, like Park and Rec had a new chair this year or last year, I should say, I sat down with her for about an hour, and that was just providing guidance on how to run meetings, like public comments, what's a business item versus discussion. It's those types of points. So I think it just helped with that also.
Well, so ultimately, thank you for sharing what your experience was and the informal kind of aggregation of it. But I think also, maybe staff could speak to it more, but there were I think that this position does have some kind of legal ramifications and as far as how council conducts themselves and interacts with those boards to keep it even. And so that's why clarity for us, so that we all interact with them in the same manner, is important. Not that it's a critique of the past, but like part of it is the other cities do have liaison definitions. And so it was Amy Ackerman that actually provided examples of other towns and the way that they protect themselves and the council members that are assigned to those positions to conduct themselves within the guidelines that those advisory committees allow. Right. And so I think that that's part of it. So it's not like, and so I guess in sharing what you found useful, ultimately, maybe staff could respond to whether those would still be effective tools or whether basically, we would want to discourage that and moving forward is what I look for. Is
I'm happy to speak to that. And I do think this is relevant. So on the one hand, I think as maybe it's, and hopefully this is good because we can talk about the duties and expectations as they're written, but I also think it's important just to, in general, the way I view this is that the liaison role is really, it's helping to, it's being informed of what's going on in these various different committees and commissions. And then being able to speak to those potentially when those issues come and to the town council. It is not really the role of the liaisons to interact with the staff necessarily who's actually running the meetings, agenda setting, any sort of work with respect to how staff and the commissions or committees are actually running those meetings and setting agendas. Those can be communicated. This gets back to my job description and the actual what was approved by the town council in my contract. Any communication with staff, if there is concerns about how things, staff's role and how they are interacting with certain commissions or committees, that can come to me and I can communicate that to particular staff and work with them on sort of their relationship with committees or commissions and how things are sort of moving through the process and the system ultimately up to the town council. So hopefully that's clear in this, because I do think that's an important distinction between to make in the liaison role. It's much more of being a resource for as described in the duties and expectations. It can be a resource to support the advisory body in completion of its work, but it's pursuant to the numbers 2 through 7 on this definition page, which I can let Rebecca go through in more detail if that's helpful for the council. But yeah, I'll leave it there and see if you have any follow-up questions for me on that.
Well, and then so that was Fred sharing his previous experience in the informal, and now there's a kind of response that said that some of those things, it's good to have formal definition of what we like moving forward to keep it that it's a resource for the council, as I understand it, right? That we go and monitor, and then we either alert staff or bring back to council any kind of policy issues that should be considered to help those boards advise us, right? And that's my understanding from what that dialogue was. So does that answer your question? If not, do you need more clarification? And then also any other further questions?
Yeah, I just have some questions on some of the individual bullet points you have here, if I can. On number 3, where it goes, a council member should not take part, which is fine, because again, I don't take like Park and Rec. I'll listen in on the meetings, but that's it. I don't get involved in any discussions or anything like that. But it's almost like a double negative, I want to say, because unless it's requested, unless the body's deliberations or discussion, unless it requests the council members' participation in that particular discussion. But then in the next section, it says, if they ask for me as a council member for me to discuss. I'm not discussing as a council member, I'm discussing as a private citizen.
No,
It's-
you're discussing as a single council member, not as a private citizen, but as a single council member. So you speak for yourself as a council member, but not for the council. If that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. And then on number 6, it says that council liaison shall bring to the council any request. How does that work? Because it says that one of the things in here is request for expenditures of town's resources. Because wouldn't that be all be coming through a commission via a staff report?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly. Typically, that's how it's done. There'll be some sort of action or recommendation by the advisory body, the committee or commission. Ultimately, that makes its way up to the staff report to the council. I think there is an opportunity as a council member to bring an item to an agenda, a council agenda, that's coming from the committee for a particular action. So that could be a function as well.
Yeah, that one I'm fine with. It's just the other part where again, when it starts request for expenditure of the town's resources.
So Fred, I can speak to this a little
Go
bit.
ahead.
Ultimately, I have seen where an advisory board or the policy of the council, let's say, is not in line with staff, but basically if staff is always tasked with basically facilitating the discussion and moving it forward, and others in a majority fashion would like to have that discussion at the higher board, it's the purview of that individual to then alert the council, and for the council to have a discussion outside of staff for whatever reason, right? It basically it allows the discussion of non-agendized items that need policy decision that staff may or may not be comfortable with or aware of, that like it gives another avenue in which you can alert people, whether you choose to do that to the council or the staff first, or find that even if you mention it to staff, that's how I see it, as other issues that have come up in the past for discussion where it basically, they wanted other avenues. So I think it would allot that, but that's my own personal kind of impression of why that might be beneficial or necessary. And it's not ultimately that we're giving guidance. It's just that then you would identify a need that is not directly addressed through that other process and ask for it to be on the agenda. We'd put it on the agenda, and then we would talk about the policy and why it isn't, and staff would respond to it and in that manner.
So in that case, there wouldn't be a staff report.
There would not be a staff report, and I have seen agenda items about budget that have come without staff reports. And I don't always say that it's a recommended access, but it was a requested and important discussion to understand the body's concerns, right? And basically just have free flow of discussion instead of having basically a bottleneck. That's how I saw it. And that's how I see and read that through my personal experiences. Now, if I'm misinterpreting that or seeing that as not as an avenue, staff could clarify that, or we could discuss as council if we actually do think that that's a good, option. I have not opened it to public. We're still, I think, having questions, and it's still on his questions, but he's also looking.
I think why don't we table it? Why don't you do public comment, and then we can have it, I think, discussion once Eli has questions.
So,
or staff wants to.
questions for staff?
Yeah,
Please.
just one question. Thank you. This is fantastic. Thank you, guys. This question speaks to, I think, that a lot of what's important about this is that it puts guardrails to make sure that council members don't interfere in the proper functioning of these committees under the processes that we've set out. I think in that same spirit of putting guardrails there, these committees, as we've said, are advisory in nature to the town council. I know that we've in the past had situations where council members have ended up sitting on some of these committees. I was on the Climate Action Committee, for example, when it first started, stuff like that. I'm just wondering, do we have a rule or could we have a rule saying that council members can't sit on advisory boards so that we're not advising ourselves?
I think they are in most of the actual resolutions that created these committees. So there is a distinction between these 6 committees and maybe 5 without the planning commission and the ad hoc committees that I think were sort of set up for, like, I know we had like the objective design and development committee, which I pulled in a council member.
Right. Yeah. So that makes sense. And I know that you guys from time to time put together committees where you want for your own advice, for your own advice, you want a blend of council members and members of the public and whatnot. But just for these strictly advisory standing committees.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's in the resolutions, but
I mean, basically, council creates these advisory committees to advise them. And in terms of advisory committees, there's not really, you have your choice of when you create the committee, we try to set forth the duties and the powers and the appointments. And so if council, I don't believe any of the standing committees have a council seat, but or perhaps one of them does. Finance?
Not currently, though.
Not
Finance is an ad hoc committee.
Well, it's not ad hoc if it. Well, it's a hard one to categorize, but really it's up to council to make decisions about, do we want this advisory committee? If so, what do we want it to do? How can it help us get our work done? What kinds of people do we want on the committee? I think for the climate action, we put some qualifications on because we were looking for people with particular expertise. So it's really at the call of council. Again, they're advisory. They're here to create citizen engagement on issues of importance to the town and to give feedback. And I think the liaison role is really just kind of a conduit for communication. And I think it serves a couple of purposes. One is, council's got somebody paying attention to individual committees, so they're sort of aware, which can just really help council function. It can help committees function. We don't have a particular reporting structure for these committees and when they want to come. That's something council could consider, having these committees do an annual report to them so you know what's going on. I think the other thing is it's an opportunity for council to make sure their advisory committees are staying on track with their purposes and goals. Occasionally you get a renegade committee that might want to go off and on a tangent and do something, and that's not really what council is asking for the committee. So I think what we're, is it's just a way to maintain the communication. But I will say to you, you really have the control over this. It's all, there's not a lot of law on this, planning commission excluded. But so, if any of this, is something that you're like, I don't really like that, we're happy to strike it. But I think the main thing is, it's just a way so council can make sure advisory committees are doing what they've asked, and advisory committees feel that they have support and communication with council.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that's great. I think what is set out here is fantastic. And I would just recommend that the council maybe consider a policy that council members don't sit on standing advisory committees, but that is all. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great question. It looks like Becca has a more response.
Just to address Vice Mayor Beckman's question, one of the things I did want to take a look at this year was some cleanup to the town council rules and procedures. So that could always be incorporated at some point later this year when we do look at revising some items in there.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay, I don't have any questions at this time. I will have some questions for the council, but we'll do that through a discussion. So I'll open it up to public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? Not seeing none in the lobby.
We do not have emailed public comment or any hands raised via Zoom.
Okay, so with that, I'll close public comment and move it back to the dais for discussion.
I'd just like to comment that this was a major topic of conversation at the academy training for the new council members in Sacramento. And I think the topic was titled "Stay in Your Lane." And it was really good. And the liaison being a communication role and not a management role, and kind of takes me back in my memory to some of those old town council members in Corte Madera who were basically running every committee, whether they sat on it or not. And if they set up an advisory committee, it was because they wanted to produce the advice they were looking for. So we've come a long way since then. So,
So just to clarify,
love
you
this.
felt like that was not a good thing. You felt like.
it depends who. No, but the whole idea of staying in your lane makes so much sense, because once you start getting out of your lane, you're going to develop problems that are going to come back to get in the way of your own efforts. So
So
you know,
you feel like it protects
I-
you and.
I bought it
all of
hook,
that,
line, and
then-
sinker.
Okay. All right, Fred, did you have any comments or discussion that you wanted to bring up with the council or in general?
No, I just think the whole thing makes sense, and I like the way that Amy worded it. Just with the communication part of it, and we're not setting our own agenda on those committees. We're just there strictly as advisory. And then again, the communication part, I think it makes sense.
Okay.
I think it's been effective also.
Excellent. Eli? Yes, sir. Okay, so my question to the council is, there was this idea of, do we want representatives to come from each one of these advisory boards? And what I ask is, ultimately, we're going to have a response to our strategy meeting, which I think really is the policy of the council that we've all agreed to, and we will have further policy discussion on the strategy before we finalize that. But perhaps that's the appropriate time to bring the chair of those committees to basically, listen, or just make sure that they've listened to what the strategy goals are for this next year, so they can be aligned in their discussions and understand how the advice leads to the success of that strategic plan. And that could be an annual thing. If you think that would be effective, that's where my mind went. So it's a question. I don't know the answer because it just came up in my mind, but I'd like advice on that, whether that would be effective. And then outside of that, if we think that this is worth moving forward to, then we need to discuss what the different liaisons are, positions that are available, and who we'd like to assign. Because I think moving forward, once we have it and we understand, moving forward what our skill sets are and stuff, but because we haven't had a public or any kind of position like this before, I'd like to hear from each individual before we collectively assign. Because to me, the liaison is not the purview of the mayor as much as an alignment of all council and basically being okay with having subject matter experts go to these different groups and have a communication relay. So in some ways, I'd like consensus on it, not just push people into them, right? So that's my questions to you. So given that, is there any feedback? Eli, you want to start?
Sure, thanks. So I think on the first question with regards to, I think whether or not we invite committee or commission chairs to attend our kind of next strategic planning session.
Not the strategic planning session. Ultimately, Adam's going to bring back what we
Okay.
understand for approval, the strategy, basically like goal, like the
Okay.
actual strategy plan. And it's when that strategy plan is finalized that the chairs understand it. And
Can I respond to that?
Of
If I
course.
may, what I would recommend is once we have an accepted strategic work plan for 2023, let's say, I would have the staff liaisons to each of the committees report on that strategic work plan to each of the committees and commissions,
Okay.
and essentially
Maybe
agendize that and
introduction,
have
yeah.
it just
Right,
make sure
we're not-
that's communicated.
staff do it, but the liaison be there. And that's the introduction, the first introduction of the liaison as well.
I mean,
Yeah, because those two things are tied as.
okay, I'm not, sorry, can you?
So when we approve the 2023 strategic plan, the goal is to then take that, encapsulate it, and then take it to each one of the groups and
Yes.
make that an agenda item on those advisory boards, with the idea that the liaison will be present, and maybe it's their first appearance
sure.
to basically be like, yes, we signed off on this, and now this is our strategic goal as a council this year, and anything with that, like we're here to have communication about clarification of policy, basically, right, with the council and how, And that's the introduction to both the strategy, so they understand what we're doing at a council level and what we're hoping like what they're probably going to see coming down the pike in agenda items and stuff.
So you
Like,
can give a staff report each one of you. Okay.
well,
I think leaving it up to staff is kind of the whole point. Oh, sorry. That leaving that part of dealing with the committee itself to staff gives us, the council, a little bit of distance from it, an arm's length, if you will, because what you're saying sounds like if we were going to go and tell them, here's the liaison is suddenly saying, here's what the council is expecting of this committee. It's like we're trying to run it again.
no, I don't think that that's.
Rather than just be the liaison where you're communicating back and forth between the two.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of gray area.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, so I'm good with what Adam sketched out of staff being responsible for communicating the relevant portions of the work plan to each board and committee. I think somebody asked about whether we might want to receive annual reports at council from boards and committees. My thought would be maybe not necessary, just because theoretically we're sort of receiving a trickle of their work product throughout the year. And that work product comes from the agendas, which come from staff, which comes from the work plan that we all set. So I feel like it all kind of comes back and is self-evident anyways, but maybe council members feel differently. I don't know. And
No.
I personally, yeah, I think.
Yeah. And then just to the last question of setting the liaisons, I just wanted to put my hand up for Climate Action Committee, and that is all.
Okay. So as far as the reporting back, that's the other question, is ultimately we have for each of our appointments at the larger regional level, we come back and report to council. So is there an expectation within the liaisons? The reason is so the planning commission does have a representative that every council meeting should attend, right? And they go back to the planning commission and report on the agenda and the result, like the general kind of results, right? The same way we do for other meetings. So the question to me, for me to everyone else, is this expectation of the liaison, will they report out about the meetings that they attended, about like what transpired from your own perspective, or is it that the liaison doesn't do that? And
I could see liaison doing that, but there's nothing to report on. It's like we do that now. We just sit there saying, hey, I attended X, Marine Transportation Authority, and that's it, because there's nothing to report out on.
right, but or this was the big point. Like I saw 5 agenda items, but this is the one I think that as a council member we should care about.
Yeah.
Right? So that was another kind of new duty or understanding with the liaisons, is that we would hear kind of results in a way that we traditionally had not. And if we're all comfortable with that, I think that would be a good thing, because I really enjoyed it on the planning commission. Okay, so with that,
And while we're offering our services as liaisons, if it's okay, I would love to have a tenure at Parks and Rec.
Well, I'd still like to keep that. I have a good relationship with
You've
Ashley.
done it for a long time, so I
Pardon?
think you've done it for a long
I know.
time.
I still would like to keep it, though.
Well, I guess that's your decision.
okay,
and
so
choice.
yeah, so we'll discuss it as a group. So just to clarify first, before we start throwing names in the hat, there's 5 standing committees: the flood, BPAC, which are occasional. They're not.
Flood Board and BPAC are both scheduled to meet on the second Monday of the month. One meets on odd months and one meets on even months.
Okay, so it's
So
one
they're-
meeting every other month.
Correct, if it's held.
So these would
Sometimes
be
they are
6
canceled.
meetings apiece.
Correct.
Okay, the climate committee
It's
meets,
the third Wednesday of each month at
So-
4:30 PM.
so that's 12 meetings a year. The Parks and Rec,
Fourth Monday of the month.
so that's 12 once
It's
again.
usually 11. Sometimes they cancel the November and December meetings and combine it.
Right, okay, so I'm just gonna say 12 for ballpark. The oversight is only as needed, but is there kind of a ROM on that, or rough
It
order?
used to be three times per year.
Okay, and no planning. So those are the total. And so I heard Eli volunteer for the climate. Is there any other council that would like to be the liaison to that group? Because ultimately, you know, we've identified that everyone could have an interest. You just can't all have the position.
It's his.
Okay, and then, so I have heard, for Parks and Rec that currently we have, Fred and Patricia. Pat is fine. So Fred and Pat are interested in Parks and Rec. Would there be anybody interested in flood? Would there be anybody interested in flood?
Do we know if Councilmember Thomas might be
Yeah.
interested or what she might be interested in?
No, I mean, I tried to communicate with her before our trip, but no, I don't have information on that.
So we don't have to decide the liaison positions tonight. We can discuss them because it's a public meeting, so we can express our interest and then we can have time to kind of process. And then also allow Rosa the opportunity to express any interest before we make final decisions. So what I would say is, let's put all the names in the interest that we have, and then we'll come back and agree as a group how we'd like the final assignments.
So if it's helpful, there's 5 committees and 5 council members, so I feel like maybe it's just 1-to-1. And I would love to not have 2, but if you can't find someone for flood, I can do that too.
Yeah, and then
So
I mean-
my interest would have been BPAC, bike and
Okay.
PED, but seeing that my husband is the chair of that now, I do not think it's a
Right, so-
valuable thing for me
so
to
then
do,
I could
because I
put-
already know what's going on anyway, so.
yeah, so ultimately I would just like to represent on one of them, and
Oh, that's definitely.
I would be happy to interface with the prestigious ex-councilman.
Fun, he's enjoying it.
Yeah. So Eli said maybe on flood. And then the oversight, tax oversight, is there anybody that would be interested or have?
I can stay on that.
You'd like to stay on it, okay, because you have an investigative accounting background, right?
Yeah, and they only meet, I think, twice a year, if that much.
Yeah, if ultimately you would like to shed it, I think that I would be happy to support that as well. So let's think about it and we'll come back in 2 weeks and talk about it.
All right.
Okay, and then also Rosa, if she has interest. So based on that, what is staff looking for as far as, is it a formalization of the liaison and an acceptance of it, but not assigning, like what are we, do we need a motion?
I think we should formalize it with a vote.
Okay, but then with assignments at a later date after.
Correct.
Okay.
At the,
Yes, okay.
As
So can I get a motion to accept the item as requested? And
So moved.
I'll second.
okay, so can we get a vote?
Councilmember Casissa,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio,
yes.
Councilmember Thomas is absent, Vice Mayor Beckman,
Yes.
Mayor Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, so that closes our business items. So we'll move on to item number 7, which is council and town manager report.
Whoop, I'm on there. Thank you. So I have a couple of reports. One is just keeping you posted on the progress at town hall, which as we'll, I think next week, actually, we'll start to see some steel. They're planning to get actually steel out of the ground or delivered. So sorry, Ruben, you'll be, you guys will be hearing, bearing the brunt of that a little bit, but that's exciting news. So you'll start to see the structure, actually, the superstructures rise. In fact, I know we were looking at finishes even today of the interior and paint colors and things like that. So thank you, Mayor Lee, for participating in a portion of that call. So it's starting to get pretty exciting to think about actually working in that building and all of having this meeting in there as well in the future. So with that, I do want to also say I'll be sending out an email to all of you, planning on actually continuing the unfinished portion of the strategic work plan workshop with you all at the next, prior to the next council meeting. So I'll send out an email on that. We'll likely have that here. But obviously get back to me if that's not going to work for you individually. So just wanted to give you a heads up on the next council meeting. Likely going to do that at 4:30 to 6 is the timing it now. And then finally, just an update on the Tamalpais overcrossing project. The TAM board is going to be putting an item on their February 23rd agenda. I think it's actually going to go to one of their committees before that to potentially fund up to, I think, $1.2 million towards the alternative 4B. So the town council's efforts at sort of moving first and forward is starting to see some, I think, benefits in encouraging others to sort of jump in as well with some additional funding. There's still, so that's obviously going to be on the agenda. Councilmember Ravazio will be there. I think RJ will as well. And just started to steal your thunder on that one, but I wanted to announce that as well. I thought that was great to see them taking up the effort there. So with that, I'll end my report.
Do we ask questions? Does anyone have any questions for this report? Okay, so let's move to town council reports then. Patricia.
You want me to go first? Thank you for stealing my thunder. I had all the notes written. Now, I just want to say, I really enjoyed it's the Transportation Authority of Marin that Adam is referring to, for those who don't know. And I really enjoyed my first meeting, and I had an orientation with the executive director, and what a well-run organization. And their meetings are, I mean, it's almost like watching a movie. It moves so fast. People are very concise, and there's so much that they're doing. It's very impressive. The North-South Greenway is getting funded. The 580-101 connector at Bellum, which has been a problem for so long, they're really working on that. And they seem to really like this pedestrian overcrossing. I actually had a phone call from the executive director today to tell me the news that the staff was recommending to the executive committee that they release these funds. And I resisted one council member's response, which was, oh, come on, they can do better than that. I won't say who said that, but I'm really excited about working with this group, and thank you.
Yeah. Just to clarify for that, the funding, my understanding is that vast majority of toll fees have been held up through a legal challenge that was basically rejected by the appeals court. So these projects, while they've been in design and anticipated, there was a funding gap that basically, until the legal holdup had been cleared away, there was kind of questions about some of these projects. So
these funds are actually not from that particular bucket. These funds come from some designated bicycle improvement funds, and because we have this bicycle component,
personal, but the 580 and all those are now moving.
Yes, so there's a lot
say
of
that they're moving
coming in.
forward.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's from that. Just to clarify, because I wasn't in it.
It feels good right now that some of these long time needed projects are actually going to get funded and done. So
okay,
while we're still alive, maybe.
What an exciting and great report. Do you have any other reports?
No, that's all.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions no? Okay.
I'll just rattle these off because I had a busy couple of weeks. I attended and some of these there's really nothing to report on. Age-friendly Corte Madera. I attended my first meeting for Marin wildfire. I keep on saying protection, but it's prevention agency. And I did have a meeting with Mark Brown that went really well also. I also attended my first Marin Transit Board meeting. Just a couple of things there. One thing is, this has been in the works for a while to redo the Sandfeld Transit Center. I guess the EIR got approved. So now they're moving into the engineering phase, and hopefully eventually they'll move into the design phase. And then also the buses, they are looking at doing some schedule changes. nothing will affect Corte Madera. Or the two routes that run through us, so that's good news. I attend Corte Madera Sales Tax Override Committee and also the Twin Cities Disaster Preparedness Committee. Thanks.
Okay. Eli. I for once did not have a busy week and I have nothing to report. Excellent. So I have yet to officially, but later this week I have the police council and the fire council. I did do a tour of the police station and talked about strategic goals with Chief Norton this past week. And as mentioned by the town manager, I was invited to review and comment on some of the finishes for the town hall. My own strategy is based on the public design work that I've done previously, which is a much larger scale and higher impact. So I really think that it's a very luxurious and nice facility for the residents and for staff and everything. I think it's appropriate. And I just made a lot of comments about trying to meet some of our sustainability goals and clarifications about maintenance and those type of things, which I hope were useful. Yeah, but I you know, there was no big surprises and hopefully soon we'll be able to share that to a larger group. But yeah, so with that, I think that closes the town council reports. So then we'll move to item number 8, which is the discussion of draft agenda for upcoming town council meetings. Is there any comment about the or questions about the agenda? No? Okay, so with that, I'll close number 8, right? We don't have to approve it or anything. So then that leads to item number 9, which is adjournment. However, I'd like to mention, and I believe that the sanitary district meeting has been canceled today. So this will adjourn all the meetings today.